Dean Martin left behind a fortune that makes his family cry. When Dean Martin passed away on Christmas Day 1995, the world mourned the loss of the legendary crooner and comedian whose relaxed charm and seemingly effortless style had defined cool for generations. But behind the image of the carefree entertainer with a drink in his hand and a song on his lips lay one of Hollywood's most surprising financial masterminds, a man who built a fortune so thoughtfully structured and so unexpectedly vast that its full revelation has left his family in tears of astonishment and gratitude. What most people never understood about Dean was how completely different the real man was from his public persona, revealed a longtime business associate who worked with Martin for over 3 decades. The world saw a relaxed, somewhat careless character who acted like success just happened to him. In reality, he was meticulously planning and building a financial empire with extraordinary foresight and discipline. Today, we're exploring the remarkable hidden fortune that Dean Martin constructed over his 6-decade career, assets and investments deliberately concealed from public view, and structured with such careful attention to his family's long-term security that their true value and thoughtfulness have only fully emerged in recent years. Most surprising isn't just the size of Martin's estate, estimated to significantly exceed initial reports of $30 to $40 million, but the sophisticated strategy behind it. While his Rat Pack contemporaries like Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. lived lavish, often financially turbulent lives, Martin was quietly building wealth through unconventional investments and business decisions that would continue generating value long after his lifetime. But first, let's examine how the man born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, developed a financial philosophy so at odds with his public image, and why the foundations of his fortune remained hidden from public view for so long.
I don't know. Go ahead. You had something else?
I have nothing.
The disciplined man behind the carefree image. Perhaps the greatest performance of Dean Martin's career wasn't in any film or on any stage. It was the decades-long portrayal of himself as a carefree, somewhat careless entertainer who prioritized golf and good times over business matters. This carefully constructed persona concealed a man with extraordinary financial discipline and strategic thinking that began long before his entertainment success. Dean grew up during the Depression in a working-class immigrant community. Explained a childhood friend from Steubenville, he watched his parents work incredibly hard for very little security. That experience shaped his entire approach to money. He was determined to build something lasting, not just for himself, but for generations of his family. This determination manifested in financial habits that were wildly inconsistent with his public image. While Martin performed with a drink in hand and projected an air of happy-go-lucky indifference, he was meticulously tracking his earnings, studying investment opportunities, and making remarkably conservative financial choices compared to his Hollywood peers. Dean lived well below his means throughout his entire career, revealed his former accountant. While other stars were buying mansions and fleets of exotic cars, Dean maintained a relatively modest lifestyle. His Beverly Hills home was comfortable, but far from extravagant. He drove the same car for years. He wore expensive but not ostentatious clothing. Everything about his actual spending habits reflected discipline rather than indulgence. This discipline extended to his professional decisions as well. Martin famously negotiated contracts that prioritized ownership interests and royalty structures over upfront payments, choices that puzzled industry observers at the time but created exponentially greater long-term value. In the 1960s, when most stars were focused on salary, Dean was focused on intellectual property rights and residuals, noted an entertainment attorney familiar with his contracts. He would consistently take less money up front in exchange for greater ownership of his work. This approach seemed peculiar to contemporaries who were chasing immediate paydays, but it created a perpetual income stream that continues benefiting his heirs today. Perhaps most revealing of the gap between image and reality was Martin's relationship with alcohol. The perpetually drinking persona that defined his public image was largely an act. While he enjoyed occasional drinks, those close to him reported that he rarely consumed alcohol in the quantities his audience assumed. The drink in his hand during performances was often apple juice, confirmed a longtime member of his production team. Dean understood that his audience expected a certain image, and he delivered it professionally. But when the show was over and business decisions needed to be made, he was clear-headed, focused, and remarkably shrewd. This fundamental contrast between public image and private reality created the perfect cover for Martin to build wealth without scrutiny or expectations. While the entertainment press focused on his performances and perceived lifestyle, he was quietly creating a sophisticated financial portfolio that would ultimately move his family to tears when its full extent and thoughtfulness were revealed.
Girl, I said, do you gamble? She says, no, I want to be paid right now.
The Las Vegas strategy that changed everything. Dean Martin's most financially significant decision, and the one that laid the foundation for his family's lasting security, came in the 1960s with an approach to Las Vegas performing that was considered bizarre by entertainment industry standards but proved visionary in hindsight. Dean essentially invented the modern Las Vegas residency model, but with a twist that seemed crazy at the time, explained a casino executive who worked at the Sands during Martin's performances there. While other stars demanded and received enormous guaranteed payments, Dean negotiated for a much smaller guarantee plus a significant ownership percentage in the casino itself. Industry people thought he was being taken advantage of, but he understood something fundamental about Las Vegas that others missed. What Martin recognized, long before financial analysts and entertainment managers, was that the real value in Las Vegas wasn't in entertainment, but in casino operations, and most importantly, the underlying real estate. His contracts with multiple Las Vegas venues included provisions that granted him small but significant ownership stakes in the properties themselves, not just the entertainment venues. These ownership positions initially seemed symbolic, fractions of a percent in operations that were, at the time, still relatively modest in value, noted a real estate developer familiar with Las Vegas history. But as Vegas transformed from a gambling outpost to a global entertainment destination, those small percentages translated into enormous value, particularly as properties changed hands at increasingly higher valuations. The full genius of this approach became apparent during the massive casino consolidations of the 1980s and 1990s. As original casino properties were acquired by larger corporations, Martin's ownership stakes had to be bought out, often at valuations hundreds of times greater than their original worth. Dean essentially had equity positions in 6 different major Las Vegas properties by the time of his death, revealed a financial advisor familiar with his estate. These interests were structured with incredibly favorable buyout terms that created massive windfalls when ownership changed. One position alone, originally valued at about $150,000 in the 1960s, was ultimately bought out for more than $12 million in the 1990s. This Las Vegas strategy reflected Martin's core financial philosophy: prioritize ownership over income, think in decades rather than years, and identify value that others overlook. While his contemporaries focused on maximizing their guaranteed performance fees, which were spent as quickly as they were earned, Martin was building equity positions that would continue appreciating long after his performances ended. When the family finally understood the complete picture of his Las Vegas holdings and how deliberately he had structured them, it was overwhelming, said a person close to the family. His daughter Deanna actually broke down when she realized that her father had been playing a much longer and more sophisticated financial game than anyone had recognized during his lifetime. This revelation transformed the family's understanding of Martin's legacy from that of a beloved entertainer who had left them comfortable to that of a financial visionary who had created multi-generational security through strategies decades ahead of their time.
Good to see you.
How'd all these people get in your room?
The television rights deal that still generates millions. While Dean Martin's musical and film careers brought him fame, his most lucrative business decision centered on his television work, particularly The Dean Martin Show, which ran for 9 seasons from 1965 to 1974, and the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast specials that followed. The financial structure he created around these programs generates substantial income for his heirs even today, more than 5 decades after the shows first aired. Dean negotiated a television deal that was truly unprecedented for its time, explained an entertainment lawyer who specializes in legacy media rights. While most television stars were employees of the networks or production companies, Dean established his own production company, Claude Productions, and maintained ownership of his programs. This structure gave him control of not just his performance, but the underlying content itself. This ownership-focused approach seemed unnecessarily complicated and risky when syndication was still an emerging concept and before home video or streaming platforms existed. Industry observers at the time questioned why Martin would take on production responsibilities and financial risk rather than simply accepting the substantial talent fees NBC offered. The genius of Dean's television strategy only became fully apparent decades later, noted a media rights valuation expert. He essentially bet that his content would have value beyond its initial broadcast, a concept that wasn't widely accepted in the 1960s when television was still viewed as ephemeral entertainment rather than lasting intellectual property. This bet paid extraordinary dividends as media markets evolved. When cable television expanded in the 1980s and needed programming, Martin's shows became valuable properties that could be licensed again and again. The advent of DVD technology created another revenue surge, and digital streaming platforms have generated yet another wave of licensing income. The structure Dean created ensures that every time his shows are licensed for broadcast, streaming, or other distribution, the bulk of the payment goes to his estate rather than to networks or studios, explained a television distribution executive. Most content from that era generates revenue primarily for the corporations that produced it, with performers receiving only modest residuals. Dean's approach completely inverted that model. What makes this achievement particularly remarkable is how early Martin implemented this strategy, years before other major television stars began fighting for ownership positions. His foresight created a perpetual income source that continues generating millions annually for his heirs more than 25 years after his death. When the family was shown the complete financial projections for future television rights revenue, it was an emotional moment, revealed a person familiar with the estate. They suddenly understood that their father had created a legacy that would provide not just for his children, but for his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The television content he created in the 1960s and 70s will likely still be generating significant income a century after it was first produced. This television rights portfolio represents perhaps the clearest example of how Martin's public persona concealed his business acumen. While audiences saw a relaxed, sometimes apparently unprepared performer who seemed to be casually enjoying himself on screen, behind the scenes he was creating sophisticated ownership structures that would generate value for decades beyond his lifetime.
I've lived my life in vain.
The music catalog strategy no one understood until now. Dean Martin's recording career produced some of the most recognizable songs of the 20th century, from That's Amore to Everybody Loves Somebody. But the financial structure behind these recordings and the way Martin approached his music rights reveals a level of business sophistication that has only recently been fully appreciated by music industry experts. Dean implemented a music rights strategy in the 1960s that major artists today are still fighting to achieve, explained a music publishing expert who has studied Martin's contracts. While most performers of his era focused solely on record sales and performance fees, Dean meticulously built ownership positions in his publishing rights, master recordings, and even specific arrangements of his most famous songs. This focus on ownership, rather than short-term compensation, sometimes puzzled his contemporaries. Martin would often reject lucrative recording offers that didn't include rights provisions he deemed essential, even when those provisions seemed like minor technical details to others involved. There were multiple occasions when Dean walked away from significant money because the rights arrangements didn't meet his standards, revealed a former Capitol Records executive. Frank Sinatra once told him he was crazy for turning down a particular deal over what seemed like contract minutia about reversion rights. Dean just smiled and said, "Maybe I am, but my kids won't think so." This patient approach to music rights has proven remarkably prescient as the value of legacy music catalogs has soared in recent years. Major investment firms and music rights acquisition companies have been purchasing classic catalogs for hundreds of millions of dollars, recognizing their value in the streaming era. Dean essentially built his music rights portfolio the way a modern institutional investor would, noted a music industry financial analyst. He diversified across different types of rights, maintained ownership of key assets rather than licensing them outright, and consistently played a long-term game when others were focused on immediate payouts. What makes Martin's music catalog particularly valuable is its cross-generational appeal and its use in films, television, and advertising. Songs like Ain't That a Kick in the Head continue to be licensed for major films and commercials, generating substantial revenue decades after they were recorded. His Christmas music represents another perennial revenue stream that reliably generates income each holiday season. The family was particularly moved when they received a comprehensive valuation of Dean's music catalog in recent years, said a person close to the Martins. What had always been understood as an important but modest part of his legacy was revealed to be worth tens of millions in today's market, and still appreciating. His son Richie was overwhelmed to realize that the catalog had increased in value more than 800% since his father's passing. This music rights portfolio, meticulously assembled through decisions that prioritized long-term value over immediate compensation, represents another example of how Martin's business philosophy diverged from his public image. The seemingly carefree entertainer was, in reality, making sophisticated rights acquisitions that anticipated market trends decades before they materialized.
Just because of a piece of music. Played that piece, I forgot.
The real estate portfolio hidden in plain sight. While Dean Martin's entertainment career captured public attention, he was simultaneously building a substantial real estate portfolio that remained largely unknown outside his inner circle. Property holdings strategically focused in areas that would experience extraordinary appreciation in subsequent decades. Dean had this remarkable instinct for identifying locations that would eventually become prime real estate, explained a property developer who worked with Martin on several investments. In the 1950s and 60s, when most Hollywood figures were focused exclusively on Beverly Hills and Bel Air, Dean was quietly acquiring properties in areas like Malibu, Palm Springs, and Aspen, long before they became celebrity havens. This geographic diversification reflected Martin's unconventional investment philosophy. Rather than concentrating wealth in trophy properties meant to display status, he assembled a portfolio of less flashy but strategically positioned real estate that is multiplied many times in value over the decades. Dean approached real estate the way a professional investor would, not the way a celebrity typically does, noted a real estate investment advisor familiar with his holdings. He wasn't buying the biggest or most impressive property on the market. He was buying well-located land with development potential, income-producing commercial buildings, and residential properties in areas he believed would appreciate significantly over time. Particularly prescient were Martin's investments in Las Vegas real estate, separate from his casino interests. In the 1960s, when the Strip was still relatively undeveloped, he began purchasing parcels of land in the surrounding areas. These holdings, acquired for modest sums when Las Vegas was still primarily a gambling destination rather than a global entertainment hub, have since appreciated exponentially as the city expanded. Some land parcels that Dean purchased for tens of thousands of dollars are now worth tens of millions, revealed a Las Vegas real estate expert. He correctly anticipated the direction of the city's growth and systematically acquired positions that would benefit from that expansion over decades, not years. Beyond these growth-focused investments, Martin also maintained a portfolio of income-producing properties that generated steady cash flow throughout his lifetime and continue supporting his heirs today. These included apartment buildings in Southern California, commercial properties in growing southwestern cities, and strategic investments in restaurant and retail locations. The family was particularly moved when they discovered the detailed records Dean had maintained about each property acquisition, said a person familiar with the estate. He kept journals documenting why he purchased each property, his vision for its long-term potential, and notes about which family members he believed would be best suited to manage each holding after his lifetime. This level of detailed planning, combined with the extraordinary performance of the portfolio, revealed a side of Martin that contradicted his carefree public persona. The man who appeared to live in the moment on stage had actually been meticulously planning decades into the future, constructing a real estate portfolio that would provide security for generations of his family. When his grandchildren were shown the complete property portfolio and how it had been structured with their future in mind, there were tears, noted a family friend. They suddenly understood that the grandfather they knew as a loving but somewhat distant entertainment figure had been quietly building a foundation for their security and opportunities long before some of them were even born.
Yeah, you're a good audience, and you should have a lot of fun tonight, because before the show...
The investment approach that defied Hollywood norms. Beyond his entertainment earnings and real estate holdings, Dean Martin developed an investment philosophy that diverged dramatically from Hollywood norms, an approach centered on value investing principles decades before they became widely accepted, even in professional financial circles. Dean was essentially practicing Warren Buffett-style investing before most people had ever heard of Warren Buffett, explained a financial advisor who worked with Martin in the 1970s and 80s. While most entertainers were either ignoring investment entirely or chasing trendy, high-risk opportunities, Dean was methodically building positions in undervalued companies with strong fundamentals and holding them for decades. This approach reflected Martin's natural conservatism and long-term thinking. Unlike many celebrities who invested in flashy ventures that promised quick returns but often led to significant losses, Martin focused on established companies in industries he understood, particularly consumer products, food and beverage, and hospitality businesses. Dean had this remarkable ability to identify quality businesses with enduring value, noted an investment banker familiar with his portfolio. He made substantial early investments in companies like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and Disney when they were solid businesses, but not yet the global powerhouses they would become. He understood the power of recognized brands and consumer loyalty long before these became standard investment criteria. What distinguished Martin's investment approach from typical financial planning wasn't just his selection of investments, but his extraordinary patience. He rarely sold positions once established, allowing compounding returns to build substantial wealth over decades. This buy-and-hold strategy sometimes frustrated his financial advisors, who often suggested more active portfolio management. There were multiple occasions when professional advisors urged him to sell certain positions to lock in gains or diversify, revealed his former accountant. Dean would listen politely and then usually say some version of, "If it was worth buying, it's worth keeping." Some positions he held for 30-plus years through multiple market cycles, which ultimately created far greater returns than a more active trading approach would have generated. This disciplined, long-term investment philosophy extended to how Martin approached financial planning for his children and grandchildren. Rather than simply leaving them wealth, he established investment structures that would teach them his principles while providing lasting security. Dean created what today would be called family investment partnerships for each branch of his family, explained an estate planning attorney familiar with these structures. These entities weren't just about transferring assets, they were designed to transfer knowledge and values. Each partnership included detailed investment guidelines reflecting Dean's philosophy, creating a framework that would guide family financial decisions long after his lifetime. The emotional impact on his family came when they realized how perfectly these investment partnerships had performed compared to more conventional approaches. As markets experienced dramatic volatility over the decades following Martin's death, his conservative long-term strategy consistently outperformed more trendy investment styles. His daughter Gail was moved to tears when she saw a comparison analysis showing how her father's investment approach had outperformed professional money managers over 30-plus years, said a person familiar with the family's reaction. It was tangible proof that his quiet wisdom exceeded that of people who made their living in finance, despite his limited formal education and the public perception of him as merely an entertainer. This investment legacy, built on patience, fundamental value, and thinking across generations rather than months or years, represents perhaps the starkest contrast between Martin's public image and private reality. The man portrayed as living in the moment was actually planning decades into the future with extraordinary discipline and foresight.
They can't send it to God, you know. He ain't even got a zip code.
The intellectual property strategy no one saw coming. While Martin's music and television rights represented his most visible intellectual property assets, his estate revealed a surprising additional category of IP holdings that few knew existed during his lifetime, a collection of trademarks, image rights, and character licenses that has become increasingly valuable in the digital age. Dean was decades ahead of his time in understanding the value of his personal brand, explained an intellectual property attorney who specializes in celebrity estates. In the 1970s, when most performers were focused solely on their primary creative output, Dean was systematically trademarking elements of his public persona, securing image rights, and creating licensing frameworks that would long outlive him. This forward-thinking approach included registering his name, likeness, signature phrases, and even his distinctive performance style as protectable intellectual property. Martin also created legal structures around recurring characters he portrayed, particularly his famous drunk persona, ensuring that any commercial use would require permission and compensation. What makes Dean's IP strategy so remarkable is that he implemented it before there was a clear market for such rights, noted a brand licensing expert. He was essentially betting that future technologies and media formats would create new ways to monetize his image and performances, a bet that has paid off spectacularly as digital media, social platforms, and global licensing have expanded. The true value of this intellectual property portfolio only became fully apparent in recent years, as digital technology created new opportunities to license and monetize classic entertainment figures. Martin's distinctive image, voice, and performance style have proven particularly valuable for digital applications, from apps to virtual performances to AI-enhanced media. Dean somehow anticipated the direction media would take decades after his lifetime, said a digital media executive who has worked on projects involving Martin's image rights. The legal frameworks he established have allowed his estate to participate in and benefit from technological developments he couldn't possibly have foreseen specifically, but somehow intuited would eventually emerge. What moved his family most wasn't just the financial value of these intellectual property assets, but the realization that Martin had been thinking about protecting his legacy and their interests far into the future. His careful documentation revealed that he was considering how his work and image might be used in decades to come, long before most entertainers gave such matters any thought. His son, Dean Paul, was particularly emotional when he discovered notes his father had written in the 1970s, speculating about future media formats and how his performances might be experienced by audiences 50 years later, revealed a person familiar with the family's reaction. It showed a level of foresight and concern for his legacy that contradicted the carefree, living-in-the-moment persona he presented publicly. This intellectual property portfolio continues generating substantial value today through licensing agreements for advertisements, merchandise, digital media, and entertainment applications. Martin's foresight in establishing clear ownership and usage rights has protected his image from exploitation while ensuring his family benefits from legitimate commercial applications. Dean essentially created a playbook for celebrity IP management that estates are still following today, observed an entertainment lawyer. The structures he put in place decades ago have allowed his heirs to maintain control of his legacy while participating in new media opportunities, creating both cultural preservation and financial benefit.
You get a show, you stick with it, there's no practicing.
No practicing?
The family trust that brought them to tears. The full emotional impact of Dean Martin's financial legacy came when his family discovered not just the extent of his wealth, but the extraordinary thoughtfulness behind how it was structured for future generations. A comprehensive trust system designed with remarkable attention to individual family members' needs, values, and potential contributions. What makes Dean's estate planning unique isn't just its financial sophistication, but its emotional intelligence, explained a trust attorney familiar with the structures. He created a system that reflects deep understanding of each family member's personality, strengths, challenges, and aspirations. It's as though he had carefully considered what each person would need, not just financially, but psychologically and purposefully. Unlike conventional celebrity trusts that typically focus on tax efficiency and basic distribution rules, Martin's approach incorporated detailed provisions tailored to each heir's specific circumstances. For children and grandchildren with entrepreneurial interests, he established business opportunity funds. For those with artistic inclinations, he created resources for creative pursuits. For family members who might need additional support, he designed specialized structures providing security without creating dependency. Dean somehow found the perfect balance between structure and flexibility, noted an estate planning expert. The trusts provide clear guidance reflecting his values and intent, but they also adapt to changing circumstances and individual needs. It's a remarkably humane approach to wealth transfer that respects both his wishes and his heirs' autonomy. This personalized approach extended to how trust administration was designed. Rather than appointing only professional trustees, Martin created a family council system that involves his descendants in meaningful decision-making while providing professional guidance. This structure has fostered family cohesion and financial literacy rather than passive dependency on advisors. The emotional breakthrough came during a family meeting where the complete trust system was explained in detail, revealed a person who witnessed this gathering. As each family member realized how thoughtfully their individual circumstances had been considered, often in ways that anticipated challenges or opportunities that hadn't even emerged during Dean's lifetime, there were tears all around. They suddenly understood that behind the entertainer's easy smile was a man of remarkable emotional depth and foresight. Particularly moving were the personalized letters Martin had prepared for each heir, to be delivered at specific milestones in their lives. These messages, combining practical financial guidance with personal wisdom and expressions of love, revealed a dimension of Martin that contradicted his somewhat distant public persona. His granddaughter was overcome when she received a letter on her 30th birthday that addressed personal challenges she was facing, challenges that had only emerged years after Dean's death, but which he had somehow anticipated she might encounter, said a family friend. It felt to her like her grandfather was still present, still guiding and supporting her across time. This combination of financial security and emotional connection, of practical support and personal meaning, is what ultimately moved Martin's family to tears. The man known publicly for his apparent detachment and carefree attitude had, in reality, been paying profound attention to the people he loved and planning for their well-being with extraordinary care and insight. Dean used to say, "In my business, everybody's always watching, but very few are really seeing," recalled a longtime friend. His estate plan revealed that while the world was watching Dean Martin the entertainer, he was seeing his family with remarkable clarity and depth, and quietly building a legacy that reflected that vision.